I mentioned the fact that I wanted to talk about where BYU can improve. Obviously, the running game. You mentioned the fact that Jake Retzlaff's the only running back right now over 100 yards on the season. How important is it for BYU, whether it's LJ Martin coming back from injury or whoever else in that running back stable, that they get somebody in there and get that running game stabilized?
Extremely important. I think you don't want to put too much pressure on Jake Retzlaff, who's a guy who doesn't have a ton of experience, right, at the FBS level as a former JUCO player. You don't want to put too much pressure on him to carry you, and I think any offense is better with balance. We talk about it with so many teams, even within the Big 12, talk about it with a Colorado or an Arizona or a Utah, the other way around, who's trying to figure out the quarterback situation right now. Any offense with balance is a better offense, right? And I think that's a part where you don't want to be like, I think the Baylor game is a great example, right? You're up so big in that game. And I just watching the offensive tape when they had the big lead, they still had to throw the ball. And even if it was throwing shorter and doing screens and things like that, they just struggled to run between the tackles and get first downs and milk the clock, right? So there is a part where you do have to balance it out. It's a lot of pressure on a quarterback when everyone knows he's throwing, and it gets a lot harder, and teams figure out coverages, and they've been blitzing Retzlaff a lot. And I think it's just the thing. If they have balance, if they can get behind this offensive line and just pick up more first downs running the ball, I'm not saying they're going to lead the nation in rushing by any means, but to have that balance is big, especially when so many teams in the Big 12 can run the ball well.
Now, the offensive line is a big part of this, and Connor Pay, their star center, is out for at least 6 weeks. It sounds like he came on our podcast. So he had a Jones fracture. He had surgery on that. So obviously, have to reshuffle the interior of that offensive line. But looking at the grades from Pro Football Focus, their tackles, mainly Caleb Etienne, have been a revelation this season. So can you give us a sense of, without Connor Pay, what do you think they need to do in terms of the offensive line to get that going?
Look, it's just about playing fundamentally sound football. And I think the one good thing for BYU's run schemes, now they've added in a little more quarterback run and quarterback power and things like that. But for the most part, what we know BYU as is one of those outside zone teams. I always go back to watching them even under Aaron Roderick with Zach Wilson. But when they had Tyler Algier, it was outside zone. It was Tyler Algier. It was very basic, but it worked. And they could they could pop off 5-6 yards of carry anytime. Look, I'm not saying they're going to be super explosive, but even without your starting center, you have to go in there and just play fundamentally sound football. Because right now, that's the one thing that worries me. Pretty much all of their metrics across the board, rushing and run blocking, are below average at the Power 5 level. So they just need more yards before contact, more yards after contact for the backs. It really needs to just be a better group effort there. Look, and you're right, it doesn't help not to have Connor Pay in there, absolutely. But it's about the unit coming together, and it just enough. Again, just enough. And I think the addition of Retzlaff's legs as a threat really does help that. I think anytime you have a mobile quarterback who can hold backside defenders, or that you can run a design quarterback run and change the numbers game up front, that helps too. So they just have to find the right schemes and play just a little more fundamentally sound in the run game.
Okay, going back to what you said about the defense, obviously the grades across the board, very solid. But do you feel like down the stretch of the season, so obviously they've gone through 5 games, they got 7 regular season games to go. Does BYU need to have a defender or two really kind of emerge and, as you mentioned, kind of become a star player here, where maybe they boost their ratings into the 80s and really stand out?
Yeah, for me, it would be in their pass rush, because I think they create a lot of pass rush with different stunts and simulated pressures and stuff like that. But you really want one of those dynamic pass rushers to come up for you. And Tyler Batty's having a good year. He's got 15 pressures. Jack Kelly causes a lot of problems as a blitzer. But what we're trying to find that one pass rusher. They have 9 sacks on the year, for at least by our numbers. I know ours sometimes are a little weird, but we have 9 sacks on the year and only 4 of them by defensive linemen. So at a certain point, when you're playing really good passing games, let's say like Arizona coming up next, and Noah Fafita's a problem, Tetero McMillan's a problem, you need to really exhaust all your resources to cover McMillan and a really good Arizona passing game. If they can get that one star pass rusher, whoever that might be, that's kind of something they don't have right now up front on their D-line. Can they make things happen with 4? And can they make things happen against better pass protecting offensive lines? Because even the Kansas State game, I think it's pretty proven at least right now. Avery Johnson is so young. He's not a drop back passer like that. You get ahead of him, he's very uncomfortable. They made him uncomfortable. But at a certain point, you need to be able to send 4 and win the battle. If they can find a big time pass rusher, I think that helps.
Now, Batty is a guy, you figure Tyler Batty, 15 pressures. He feels like he's a step away constantly. I watch every one of these games. I rewatch them for film analysis, and it just feels like we're talking inches away from those big plays. I guess, is there some way you feel like he could get unlocked where he could become that star pass rusher? Do you see something in the numbers that maybe indicates that?
Honestly, a big thing really is just you just have to keep at it. When you're a pressure machine, but you're not finishing the sacks, it's a thing where you really have to just keep at it, right? And he could win a little more often. I've got just under a 12% pass rush win rate right now, which is decent. But you know, if you got that up closer to 15 to 17, now you'd really be talking about a guy who's getting to be a big time pass rusher. So yeah, win a little more often, win a little bit quicker, but pressure eventually leads to sacks, and that's why we're so big on pressures and pass rush grade. The two of those things give you the barometer of how often you're getting to a quarterback, at least disrupting him. And the pass rush grade, a big part of that is the quality of your wins. So winning more often, winning a little bit quicker, and I think that second part is going to be the part where now you start seeing more sacks, right? I mean, also, and look, it feels like every college team has a mobile quarterback now, too. There's very few teams with those statue quarterbacks. So it is tough to finish those plays. But the fact that, look, they have 3 different players with 15 pressures so far this season, which is solid. They just need to finish plays and maybe win a little bit quicker, and they'll start getting there. They just have to keep applying that.
Now, you talk about Arizona and that vaunted passing attack. Tedero McMillan, you mentioned, he's just absolutely lights out. In terms of what BYU needs to do on the pass defense, I think a lot of Cougar fans watch Baylor really attack BYU through the air because they just couldn't get anything going on the ground, but they still did go for over 300 yards passing. And I would say that Sawyer Robertson and Noah Fafita are on 2 very different levels as a quarterback. What about BYU's pass defense? What needs to change there, in your opinion?
I just, I don't think they're playing necessarily too bad. It's just, I think, again, the pass rush would help it, right? I think it's kind of a similar thing to me. It's a good team effort. They have solid players across the board, but who's my lights out guy, or who's the safety that's really going to start reading the football and getting to it? And we got some turnovers in the Baylor game, which was big time, especially to end the game, right? I need that a little more often. It's kind of that thing. They're playing sound football. Now I need to start making plays on the ball, right? And it's kind of that thing. It's their entire defense is kind of the same across the board. They're playing sound football for sure. They're playing good enough winning football. When do we start making game-changing plays? Because that was the fun part in the Kansas State game, where we got game-changing plays. We got interceptions. We've got a scoop and score, right? Then obviously the special teams touchdown. It's about creating turnovers and making the big plays, as opposed to just being, sound and efficient, which is great. But in a game like this against Arizona, just being good enough might not work for you. You got to force some turnovers. So I think they've done that the last 2 weeks, and that's really, those plays on the ball need to keep coming from their secondary.
I know this might be off the beaten path, but we've not talked about special teams. And actually, it's been a weapon for BYU this year. A fake punt last week against Baylor. The week before that, a fantastic punt return that almost turned into a disaster before it turned into what it was. And then also a kick return 2 weeks before that for a touchdown. How much can special teams help BYU down the stretch here?
It's a huge deal. And down coaching, I used to coach high school football in Florida, and for a while I coached special teams, and I absolutely loved it. Look, it makes such a big difference because, in football, it's hard for, even with all of our information, to quantify momentum. Yeah. But a kick return touchdown, a fake punt that your punter goes for 20 yards, the punt return touchdown that you mentioned, it's momentum. It's all of a sudden it's turning the game around. It's flipping it upside down, and all of a sudden you have a lead. Because honestly, especially that punt return against K-State, once that happened, the game was over. That was the end of the game right there. We didn't need to see the rest of it because the momentum was just so far on BYU's side. It is massive. Look, teams that are good on special teams win more football games, and we're even, we're behind the scenes. We're always trying to find more ways, and coaches are always trying to find more ways where it's like, how can we quantify this and make sure that we're doing this the right way? Because they're game-changing plays. Even things like punting and kicking off and kicking field goals. How many teams a week do we see missing field goals and losing ball games, or a shank punt loses a ball game? If this is a thing that BYU prides itself on and they can rely on all season at this level, it's going to make a huge difference, because there are teams out there that don't play good special teams, and those are the teams that in big moments in the biggest games, you find that out. If you have a punt returner that's muffing it all the time, or if you have a field goal kicker you can't trust, these things matter. So the fact, the Kansas State game on our show, on our show with Max, I told him, I said, this was as good as a 3-phase beatdown as you will see all season, because they did it. They did it on offense, on defense, and on special teams. So it really exemplifies the team effort that BYU is playing with right now, despite not having really any of the household names that we think of throughout college football.